They're not answering our pings, all sectors. They're locked in. Commander Tarek Holland leaned over the station rail, eyes locked on the overhead display as data fed across 3 panes in rapid succession. His breath left a fog on the angled surface. He didn't wipe it. Beneath him, the operations deck moved with the frictionless urgency of trained staff. No panic, but no pretense of normalcy either. "Trajectory updates," he said without raising his voice. "Still converging. Impact in 5 minutes, 31 seconds. Targets confirmed, rings 1 through 5, 0 deviation." Holland nodded once. He tapped the edge of his collar to bring up the deck-wide announcement circuit. "This is Commander Holland. All remaining civilians to sealed pods. Crew to fallback stations. Emergency Protocol Theta-7 is now in effect." The message cut without flourish. No reassurance, no final words. Above them, suspended in the orbital drift of Kepler 9d, Echelon Station glowed with artificial life. 12,000 personnel, including families, research teams, logistics controllers, and diplomatic liaisons, all situated inside Earth's most integrated node across Accord space. It wasn't a fortress, it was a synchronization hub. Every hour, the station processed hundreds of corridor traffic sequences, transit permits, and atmospheric calibration loops. For the Echelon meant efficiency. For Earth, it meant presence. And for the Jassari Coalition, it meant control slipping from their fingers. For years, the Jassari had watched Earth's involvement in interspecies coordination deepen through civilian platforms. Freight routing, customs optimization, emergency navigation overlays. Earth had never led military fleets through contested space. It hadn't needed to. Its influence flowed through operational consensus and system-wide standards, and Echelon was the centerpiece of that architecture. Behind Jassari closed council doors, Echelon had been declared untenable. Its legitimacy was debated not through warfare metrics, but through system dependency ratios. Internal security analysts mapped scenario branches. In every long-term projection, Earth's tools became foundational. Once embedded, they could no longer be negotiated with, they could only be accepted. So they launched early. The kinetic rods were fired from dormant orbital platforms buried in the shadow of 2 small moons. Their movement was masked by orbital decay fields, their descent timed with planetary orbital lag to reduce early detection. They did not broadcast intent. They did not require fuel signatures. They weren't accompanied by carrier ships. They fell. Inside Echelon's operations core, Holland walked the floor in silence. He passed each terminal with a nod, an engineer sealing magnetic clamps on outer corridor doors, a technician hardwiring power redirection scripts manually into bypass circuits. One woman at the sensor array was crying silently as she keyed in targeting logs for the capsule recorder. There was no command room shouting, no cinematic swell. There was work. He paused at the rear station, a data logistics terminal that had already rerouted 74% of the internal logs to auxiliary storage. "Are the capsule feeds clean?" "They're running triple redundant," the tech replied, his voice dry and flat. "We'll get the capsule clear, sir." "Not get launch." The tech didn't hesitate. He hit the physical eject. Inside the station spine, a drive pod the size of a wine bottle was fired down a vacuum rail, slipping clean through an external spine cavity and firing into drift trajectory, locked towards Sol. It carried only hard data, no encryption layers Earth couldn't afford to expose. No symbols, no threats, just a report. Cross-habitation corridors, emergency bulkheads engaged. In the residential arc, families were still sealing into pods. A child looked up at the amber lights, asking if it was another drill. The adult next to him didn't respond, their hands tight around the pod harness. In the medical wing, bioengineers packed vials into foam canisters, even as stabilizers buckled beneath them. Gravity dipped by 11% across the lower corridor. Several doors jammed. 4 were cut open by staff using external braces. Impact time 90 seconds. Commander Holland stepped to the Central Command interface and keyed the last layer of shielding into active override, not to save them, but to ensure the relay core recorded every energy deviation in the atmosphere. "Sir," came a voice from the secondary console. "We've got surface dispersion, energy bloom pattern. They've fired?" The operator nodded once. "Final confirmation. They're landing now." The first strike hit near the lower docking ring, directly at the station's rotational anchor. What happened next wasn't visible. It was evident. Everyone felt the difference in inertia. Objects tilted slightly. A cup slid from a table near the rear analytics console. The audio feeds crackled. Gravity rebounded, then dipped again as stabilizers tried to compensate. Then the second impact sheared the corridor above Holland's level. A red arc traced itself down the internal displays as systems compartmentalized the failure. From space, the station looked intact for a moment. Then the rotating outer shell split into 3 drifting bands, torn apart at the seam lines where shielding generators had been weakest. Inside Ring 3, atmosphere peeled out through the corridor like smoke dragged through a slit. One of the thermal regulators vented coolant directly into a life support station. Lights failed in sequence. Emergency pods that hadn't already launched were shredded against the interior walls. Echelon wasn't built for this. It was constructed for endurance, not assault. 2 more strikes landed within seconds, one tearing straight through the central data vault, another hitting the agricultural dome. Internal power readings cascaded into 0. The command deck lights snapped dark. Holland's last view on the heads-up display showed the forward spine buckling inward like a crushed pipe. He didn't move again. The Jazari observation grid confirmed the target's full neutralization 30 seconds after final contact. 8 successful penetrations. All corridors disabled. Relay functions terminated. They issued a single-sentence statement to the Accord Assembly, routed through diplomatic chain without flag priority. Regional instability addressed, no retaliation expected. By the 3rd hour, edited thermal footage began circulating, frames showing Echelon's core glowing hotter than expected, suggesting covert energy modules. Nothing conclusive. Just enough to raise doubt. Supplementary files included flagged footage of non-standard data routing from outer rings. Public reactions followed the script. Inside Kepler 9D's orbit, Echelon's remains began their long drift into decaying spin. Fragments rotated with silent elegance, reflecting system light like scattered glass. Emergency pods pinged the void until power cells gave out. Line made it past the static field range. Its message was clipped, intermittent, but it continued broadcasting. And from inside Earth's deepest relay vaults, a forgotten channel, long dormant, picked up the echo. Still nothing. Not a signal, not even a private handshake ping. Earth's lines are clean across all layers. On the 11th floor of the Accord's Media Arbitration Tower in Andari Sector, 3 diplomats watched the same looped image. A planetary drift feed showing the debris field above Kepler 9D as a faint silver ring, irregular, expanding. Their eyes tracked blinking markers, none of which were tagged with Terran codes. The laser plasma display flickered momentarily, then refreshed its orbital telemetry. Nothing had changed. Down on Earth, silence had grown louder. From Thessalonica Arc Port to Bogota Drift Belt, murmurs filled terminals, cafes, overflow platforms. Every person knew the same thing. Echelon Station had collapsed mid-orbit, shredded by a coordinated strike from a major Accord signatory. What they didn't know was why no one from Earth had said anything. No retaliation, no condemnation, not a single word. Political analysts tried to fill the space, drawing connections to the Arkeen non-response, the Zynar veto, the failure to re-elect Admiral Corvin to the Accord judiciary. Theories bloomed. So did unease. On the 8th night, protest banners draped the side of the new Pacific Council dome. They weren't calling for war. They were calling for clarity. Some demanded action. Others demanded mourning. The ones who stood silently did so with hands marked in gray ash, a reference to orbital funeral rites abandoned decades ago. Grief had never been efficient, but now it felt necessary. Inside Earth's Europa Strategic Command, deep beneath glacial shell layers drilled 3 centuries prior, Fleet Master Rovarin stood in the echo-dampened core of Decision Ring 1. The room's walls curved like a planetarium dome, though there were no stars projected above, only cascading streams of network bandwidth displayed in fluid charts and real-time corridor overlays. The air carried a dry chill, clean but dense, sharpened by the copper tang of static discharge that lingered beneath every surface. Each breath felt like exhaling through layered filters. He turned toward the vault interface. Is the relay awake yet? One technician, seated near the lower control slope, kept his posture straight despite clear fatigue. Ping loop completed 5 minutes ago. Echo signal came back clean. Payload arrived. Capsule integrity verified. Decryption? Not yet. Protocol requires magnetic isolation. We're routing the capsule through analog pins. Baron didn't nod. He never did. To the rest of the Accord Council, Earth's silence looked like either confusion or restraint. Inside Europa Command, it was neither. It was filtration. Every possible response had already been modeled against 12 counter-escalation ladders, each built around Earth's legacy architecture, woven through the Accord's civilian framework. Reacting immediately would have exposed what Earth could do. Waiting forced others to guess what Earth already had. Above them, the capsule the size of a child's forearm sat inside a containment cradle surrounded by 8 layers of insulation and 6,000 archival nanobridges. It had arrived through an old sublight drift corridor, pinged twice against long-retired relay posts before finding its way into the private intake node buried inside the mantle of Solnit's oldest junction hub. It hadn't been guided. It had been aimed, blind, slow, deliberate. When the capsule finally unlocked, it didn't show devastation. It showed breathing. One of the final frames was thermal, a sealed compartment inside Echelon's central life support ring. 4 bodies, their outlines faint but intact, pressed together as atmosphere levels dipped below survivable thresholds. A child's signature lingered slightly longer. There was no audio, only heat, light, and decay curves. The file was labeled 7164 rest. Varen reviewed it once, then he stepped back from the table and keyed his ID into the authorization matrix embedded in the floor. The panel lit in response, then dimmed, and then the wall behind him shifted inward as if inhaling. It revealed the old rail. To anyone else in the Accord, Europa's inner vault system was an outdated relic. Pre-I, pre-synthetic reasoning. That was the point. Buried inside the rail were Earth's continuity triggers. Systems built not to activate weapons, but to deny their use to anyone else. Counselor Ardenin Hesk arrived 30 minutes later. She removed her gloves as she entered, pressing them flat against her thigh. Her voice didn't echo in the chamber. Every sound was absorbed by the room's design. Is this why we've been silent? She asked. We've been filtering noise, Varone said. The capsule gave us clarity. Her eyes flicked to the overhead chart. 8 paths had lit up in narrow bands, all leading outward. Not toward enemies, but toward Earth's embedded infrastructure. This isn't retaliation, she said. No, Varane replied. It's correction. Outside the chamber, across Earth's networks, no press briefings were scheduled, no declarations were filed. Accord embassies were given updates. Echelon was confirmed lost. Investigations would be ongoing. Earth retained full compliance with diplomatic treaties. None of these words touched the root of the matter. Back at the Accord's central station, on the edge of the Triad Junction, a junior analyst named Saren Das watched the data cascade from Earth's infrastructure feeds. She noticed several of Earth's oldest corridor approval nodes had gone dark. No cause codes were attached, no faults were reported. The systems weren't damaged, they'd been unplugged, as if Earth had simply turned away from the table. Supervisor, she said, pointing to her screen. Earth corridor sinks are stalling. The supervisor leaned over, then, with a soft breath, sat back in his chair. They're beginning their response. Das blinked. By shutting down? No. That's how Earth speaks. On the 12th day, no fleet launched. No soldier marched. Nothing moved. Only 8 dormant lattice junctions lit up across deep space infrastructure layers. Subsystems Earth had helped design, maintain, and encrypt decades earlier. The capsule never said what Earth would do next. It didn't need to. Its purpose wasn't to deliver threat, it delivered context. Inside Europa Vault 7, a quiet signature registered across Continuity Channel Delta, and Earth's silence turned inward, not to prepare for war. To begin revocation. It's not encrypted, said the technician. It's something worse. Varun didn't reply. His hands hovered above the intake cradle as the capsule's carbon sheath cracked open along pre-coated seams, releasing a hiss of stabilizing gas that smelled faintly of old polymer and dried coolant. The air in Vault 7 remained steady, every particulate monitored to 6 decimals, but the moment felt heavier anyway. The capsule clicked into the diagnostic rail with a mechanical finality, as if it had been waiting for this alignment since it left Echelon. The room was sealed. No network uplink, no remote observation. 6 council members stood inside, each watching the heads-up display above the cradle, which flared into layered interface mode the moment the file tree unlocked. There were no protective firewalls, no system tricks, no active barriers. It was raw, deliberate, built for witnessing. First came the internal layout logs, structural collapse patterns traced in white over red, oxygen bleed curves, bulkhead breach cascades, secondary system failures. Each graph updated in chronological flashes, building a rhythm that ended too early. The graphs did not taper, they cut. Then came the thermal imprints. A corridor chamber inside, Ring 2, recorded 39 seconds before full systems failure. 6 bodies, huddled in quadrant formation. One of them, much smaller than the others. The residual heat from their torsos glowed dull against the walls, then dimmed. The timestamp on the final frame stopped at 00 and 16 seconds UTC drift. Show the audio layer, Varun said. A confirmation tone pulsed, and the playback began. It didn't start with screaming. It began with alarms, clipped and sharp, layered under the hiss of sealants failing across ducts. A male voice, shaky, middle-aged, called out coordination numbers, then repeated a child's name twice. Somewhere in the distance, automated lockdowns hissed shut, followed by a dry cough. Another voice whispered, "It's okay, look at me, breathe with me." Then static swallowed everything. The playback stopped automatically at system cutoff. No fade, no loop. Counselor Ardine Hesk rubbed the side of her face slowly, as if trying to ground herself against the smooth wall. That's what we waited for. Baron nodded. Now we stop waiting. He moved to the command console and pulled a hardware-only interface block from the center drawer, a gray unit the size of a clenched fist, with no digital ID, no label, no beacon code. It wasn't part of any modern network. It had been designed to be forgotten. The block snapped into place. The laser plasma display above it immediately responded, not with color, but with format. A new interface opened, black on NAC, command line only. Authorization required, said the Vault AI, voice flat. Baron didn't speak. He drew a stylus from his sleeve and pressed his thumb to the biometric key. The screen blinked once. The continuity archive interface loaded. 17 protocols appeared. One was gray, all others remained locked. Arden read the name aloud. Resolution frame gray. The is public command structure, Varn explained. Not for power, only for survivability. If we ever lost the ability to coordinate without visibility, this gives us a fallback. One that doesn't require consensus. Another counselor, Jor Mvar, the youngest, folded his arms. I've never even heard of this protocol. You weren't meant to. The person who wrote it insisted on absolute burying. Roofed. The interface pulsed once more. A name populated the screen. Vor. Brannick, architect/primary keyholder. Hesk blinked. He's still alive? Technically. Retired under sealed clearance. No external comms. He's been off-grid for 30 years. Ever scoffed. And we're going to hand this to a ghost? Varen keyed through to the next layer. A buried command tree unfolded. He bypassed 8 nested confirmation loops until he reached a final screen labeled only if irreversible. The archive under that command didn't open into strategy, it opened into systems. Corridor permissions, transit node management, infrastructure handshake hierarchies. The continuity protocols weren't retaliation plans. They were keys to structural leverage. Earth had embedded them under Accord standard interoperability templates. Everything legal, everything forgotten. And Vor had designed every layer. Bring him in, Varun said. Security clearance echoed across 4 layers. A relay drone already parked near Ceres Station pinged its confirmation. Brannick Vor had not activated his credentials in over 3 decades. But they had never expired. He lived in a sealed relay pod, surrounded by outdated machinery and analog switches. Not out of nostalgia, but to remain invisible to anything artificial. 3 hours later, his arrival in Vault 7 was wordless. He walked with a limp acquired during a relay stabilizer collapse in '92 that had never been repaired. He wore a coat 1 decade out of date and boots that had been scuffed so many times the color couldn't be named. His eyes were steady. Varen didn't greet him with protocol. He pointed to the console. Vor looked at the screen for 7 seconds, then again for another 5. He didn't ask for clarification. They used the anchor nodes, Vor said. Varen answered softly. They disabled our keystone while claiming we violated theirs. Vor stepped forward and tapped the interface. It responded immediately. He typed in 12 characters and pressed confirm. Resolution frame gray activated. Heads-up displays throughout the vault shifted. New systems lit. The infrastructure lattice glowed in outline, threaded across the Accord map like exposed wiring. These weren't weapons. These were permissions Earth had always owned and never used. Vor spoke without emotion. These aren't attacks. They're revocations. They don't break systems. They remove us from them. Mvar asked quietly, You planned all of this? Vor turned toward the younger man. I built a foundation no one thought was structural. Now they'll discover it had load-bearing consequences. No one else spoke. The screen marked final confirmation. Continuity sequence Echo 9 armed. Ullum Black is awake, said the systems lead. Signal synchronization is stable across all 6 nodes. They're not moving, but every channel's listening. In Vault 7, where frost laced the sealed walls and the temperature control never fluctuated more than a fraction, Brannick Vor stood in front of the lattice map. The room carried no sound beyond keystrokes and relay status confirmations. Outside its physical boundary, his name no longer existed in any living registry. His reactivation did not appear in military logs. No newswave reported his involvement. The council issued no communiques. Not a single image of his face would circulate. That too had been part of the design. 8 dormant command layer nodes were now pulsing with verification loops. They were scattered across civilian-facing infrastructure hubs, buried inside trade terminals, weather control systems, and corridor calibration arrays. All were nominally Accord-owned, Earth-engineered and publicly neutral. None of them had emitted traffic in years. Now, they were listening. Vor adjusted the tuning column with 1 finger, rotating the map until the edge of Earth's core lattice touched the periphery of Jasari-controlled space. He didn't speak until the final node lit green. Run payload validation against Layer 9, he said. The technician behind him didn't question the term. Layer 9 was never defined in the manuals. It referred to authentication scripts, encoded below standard redundancy levels, quantum sequenced, interlaced with corridor permissions, and stored in read-only vaults that couldn't be rewritten by anyone above executive level. The payloads weren't viruses. They weren't logic bombs. They weren't even triggers. They were handshakes so old, so thoroughly forgotten that every active system simply accepted them as structural truth. In low orbit above Europa, 6 black-bodied frigates began their alignment. These were not capital ships. They weren't armed in the conventional sense. Their design language was old, built for silence and self-correction. Each hull was layered with reactive coating, tuned to thermal noise rather than defensive conflict. Their purpose wasn't force projection, it was synchronization. Each carried a single vault. No crew, no weapons bay, no warboard interface. Inside those vaults were sequence keys built around Earth's most secure continuity protocol, not to fight, but to revoke. These were Earth's permanent address changes, broadcast through encoded trust signals designed to disable permissions Earth itself had once issued. War's voice broke the silence again. Begin. Cradle handshake cycle. Quiet protocols only. Sync across black units. No corridor leakage. The technician swallowed once. They won't know we're talking? They'll know something moved, but not what. On the Accord side, the silence drew suspicion. Earth had still not mobilized, no fleets deployed, no inquiries filed, no legal action pushed. Systems analysts across neutral sectors began whispering. Perhaps Earth couldn't respond. Perhaps Echelon had been a cornerstone more critical than expected. Perhaps silence meant collapse. The Jazari interpreted that silence another way. Within their internal reports, Earth's inaction was labeled behavioral confirmation, soft state regression. The conclusion was simple. Earth lacked the structure to respond in kind. The Accord would stabilize without contest. Civilian systems would adapt, and once trade normalization resumed, the Echelon incident would be history. A necessary act with an acceptable cost. By the end of the 4th day, Jazari-controlled media had pivoted from defensive justification to narrative stabilization. A lead anchor on the coalition's largest channel opened with the phrase, "Earth's contribution has always been symbolic," before pivoting to long-term system redundancy benefits. Political advisors reinforced the term, symbolic, redundant, passive. Inside Vault 7, Vor reached forward and shut off the room's ambient light. The lattice map dimmed, the edges of each synchronization path now glowing like static trails under glass. He watched them converge. One by one, the command nodes verified Earth's control channel. The AI did not override, it authenticated. Varen entered the chamber from the side lift. His boots made no echo. "They think we're finished," he said. "They think we were ever visible," Vor corrected. That was the flaw. The room remained dark. Behind them, the black units continued their alignment, each orbit slowly matching their drift fields with triangulation satellites Earth had seeded years before. Not as weapons, as calibrators. Trusted, neutral, efficient. Vor stared into the center feed. "We never sold weapons. We sold predictability. That's why they let us in." "And that's why they never saw us," Varun replied. One of the peripheral lights blinked red. The technician stepped forward. "Command Layer 7 relay showing triple verified back channel. Acceptance complete. No checksum fault. They're online." Vor allowed himself a breath, the kind that doesn't settle nerves but acknowledges something irreversible has started. "We never needed to build fear," he said quietly. "We built familiarity, and we made sure nothing could run without us." The technician hesitated, hand hovering over the secondary control band. What now? Vor looked down at the table, where the feed showed the Jasari corridor matrices still running Earth's original sync code. Their translators had never bothered to rewrite it. It had worked too well. Now, Vor said, we begin detachment, one system at a time. Outside the vault, in a Jasari logistics station above corridor point Zal 4, a freighter awaiting clearance received a failure notification that cited no disruption, no power outage, and no cyber attack. The corridor's permission handshake had returned a blank loop. The system had forgotten who owned it. Back on Earth, inside an auxiliary operations tunnel at Fleet Systems Archive 9, one technician watched a live terminal flicker. It didn't fail, it disconnected. He leaned in, expecting a glitch. The screen redrew itself. The corridor shifted from green to gray. He checked the routing table twice, then once more. Still gray. The technician keyed the system tag into his log and flagged it for escalation. Description: corridor, handshake, reverted to, null origin. Action, escalation requested. Cause: unknown. Error code: none. Signature source: Earthside Control, Anchor Echo 9. Inside Vault 7, Vor returned his attention to the quiet map. Everything they trusted to function will continue to function, he said. Varen folded his arms. Until what they control stops responding. That's not disruption, Vor answered. That's architecture. The technician looked up. Corridor 3A, just dropped authorization. Vor nodded. They'll think it's a misfire, then an outage, then a sabotage attempt. And after that, they'll realize we didn't strike back. Varen tilted his head. Then what did we do? Vor replied, we stopped answering. Target 3A is still rerouting, barked Commander Alaric, tapping the side of the heads-up display as the readout flickered. Get me a clean uplink through Dock Relay Bravo, now. No one answered. On the Jasari command deck, screens blinked out of rhythm. Interfaces stuttered. Not from damage, not from overload. The systems were hesitating, as if waiting for permissions no longer offered. One technician raised his hands in silent panic, shaking his head as the deck lights dimmed. His console reinitialized. Command authority prompt. Unrecognized input signature. The synchronization had completed. Far above, Earth's 6-column black frigates did not arrive. They didn't translate through corridor warp. They were already there, tethered to long-dead satellite shells and inert calibration anchors no longer tracked in Jasari records. There had been no fleet formation, no fanfare. They were written into the infrastructure like punctuation long ignored. One of the shield relays above the Kasheri defense ring flickered and failed. Not from attack, from authentication collapse. The generator still pushed energy, the grid simply declined to receive. Inside the Jasari capital ship, Hektalan, the weapons matrix flicked into maintenance protocol. Fire control locked, crew overrides failed, commands rerouted into echo chambers. Each press of a panel produced nothing but red highlight returns, awaiting external verification. We've lost corridor command, shouted the nav officer. All targeting systems have reverted to safe state. Admiral Kirth turned with boiling disbelief. Run internal diagnostics. Purge crosslinks manually. Already in process, came the flat response from engineering. The feed overhead pulsed a message in low-res blue. System trust, anchor, revoked. Across 12 key relay corridors, satellite handshakes inverted. Jasari control grids ceased to respond. They hadn't been hacked. They had been told to stand down by the very handshake code that Jasari never reprogrammed. Earth's original corridors had simply stopped answering to their tenants. Admiral Kirith pounded a control surface. The console went dark for 3 seconds before refreshing with a new screen. A rotating seal. Not Jasari. Not Accord. Earth's. Burned into the substructure of the very systems they had paid Earth to build decades ago. Then came the reaction. Jasari strike cruiser Zareth Khan, observing from low orbit, locked a single Earth column black frigate into its target array. The order came fast, old instincts, new fear. Captain Varel didn't hesitate. He authorized launch. 2 rail-based flares streaked across the void. They struck the black-bodied frigate with enough impact to shatter a mining transport. The vessel tilted. No fire, no return strike, no explosion. The impact vanished into the black shell, absorbed or ignored. 4 seconds passed. Then the Zareth Khan lost helm control. Primary engines throttled to half. Course vector adjusted, stabilizers reoriented. A low alarm tone sounded. Navigation Officer Ralvek looked up, eyes wide. "We're being docked," he said, "by our own routines." The cruiser's guidance matrix shifted to return coordinates. Not enemy territory, a depot. One built by Earth, still operational. The cruiser began accelerating toward it. Inside the control center of Earth's Vault 7, Varun stared at the status line. "They've fired," he said. Vor nodded once. "So now the system corrects." The cruiser did not resist, its thrusters remained under command. Not Earth's commands. Its own. Systems reverted to maintenance alignment, to safety protocols buried in their firmware. Protocols Earth had authored, and Jasari engineers had never fully rewritten. "Will it crash?" Varun asked. "No," Vor replied. "It will dock. It believes that's safer." Back aboard the Zareth Khan, the bridge fell into chaos. "Override it," Captain Verl screamed. "Cut all guidance relays, disable propulsion nodes." "We can't," cried the engineer. "It's not responding to us." The crew watched in horror as their own warship adjusted orbit, approached the silent depot, and gently attached itself to the retrieval clamps with seamless precision. The ship believed it had completed an emergency return maneuver, and then it shut down. Complete lockdown. The laser plasma display blinked once. Text appeared. "Dock sequence verified, system realignment underway, authorization route." Inside the Accord, panic took hold. Delegates demanded updates. Analysts flooded the relay boards. Half of Accord diplomatic nodes showed red status bars. Corridor sync clocks stalled. Trade lanes stuttered. But Earth didn't say a word. Their systems did. Power still flowed. Satellites still rotated. Vessels remained intact, but none of it responded to the new masters. Earth hadn't taken control. It had removed recognition. As Earth's Council reviewed the data capsule again, the screams, the slowing oxygen, the child's last cry, no statement was issued. Correction had begun, and correction did not need permission. Back in Vault 7, Vor spoke quietly. "This is insertion, not conflict. We're not inside their systems. We're part of them." Varin watched the next ship's status flicker. Another Jasari warship. Another dock sequence. "What do we do if they escalate?" he asked. Vor didn't blink. "Then we show them what escalation looks like when it obeys instructions we wrote before they built their first fleet." And another corridor node disconnected from its assigned structure. Not through sabotage. Through silent consensus withdrawal. Earth wasn't advancing. The rest of the galaxy was being left behind. "Check that display again," snapped Director Relevorn, leaning over the shoulder of the logistics officer. His breath hit the man's neck, sharp with stimulants and the heat of unfiltered tension. "I already did, twice. It's not a local error." The officer tapped through 3 failsafe screens. Each one blinked the same static message at him, white letters imposed on a gray-blue background. Authorization rejected. Refer to Echo 9. Again. "I said it's not local, sir." The man turned, eyes hollow from sleeplessness. "Every cargo node, relay buoy, fleet routing protocol, they're all rejecting input. Every override we've used. Every token, even the master seed." Vayorn stepped back. The command center hadn't dimmed, but the silence inside it felt dimmed. The lights above didn't flicker, yet the world felt darker. Across the Jazari planetary network, confusion turned to dread. Atmospheric routers dropped live links to planetary traffic. Weather hubs disengaged from fleet orbit regulators. Aerial drop bays froze in mid-deployment and retracted without command. Not a single shot had been fired. And yet, everything had stopped moving. In orbit, 6 heavy-lift destroyers from Coalition Segment 4A hung motionless, each armed, fueled, and crewed, each refusing every action requested by its bridge commanders. Echo 9, repeated Tar Lindek, Chief Systems Analyst. His voice cracked the moment he said it. Echo 9 was never a Jazari protocol, its Terran root architecture. Another officer scoffed. Impossible. We scrubbed every feed, every loopback. We verified no foreign code. You verified no active foreign code, Tarlin replied, eyes narrowing as he loaded a capture trace onto the central heads-up display. They didn't install malware. They wrote the scaffolding. The corridors we've been using, the frequency relays, atmospheric tables, predictive launch models. They weren't just Earth's contribution. They were Earth's control layer. Director Vaorn approached the display. He didn't blink as the playback looped. Internal systems requesting routing approval? Denied, not because of external interference, because internal logic trees had redirected toward route validation, and every route trace led to the same buried line. Echo 9, auth required. Show me the cities, he said. The viewport behind him expanded. From orbit, the lights of Junevalt, the planetary capital, looked undisturbed. No fires, no blackouts. Supply lanes still aligned to their static markers. Nothing burned, nothing failed. Accept control. They flipped every system passive, whispered one of the aides, hand drifting to her collar like it might steady her heart. None of the damage is physical. Bourne gritted his teeth. Then what is it? They've made our systems obsolete, Tarlin said, retroactively. Beneath them, Logistics Tower started displaying a message in deep indigo. Request denied, consult Echo 9 repository. On Calres Prime, an entire suborbital command fleet froze mid-patrol. Navigation arrays returned to base vectors. Local override refused. Hull integrity remained untouched, yet the ships flew no longer. In a mineral transport yard, loaders detached from grav rails and powered down. Not from sabotage, but from lack of validation. They are not even touching our borders, murmured Kreshian, a defense attaché. They don't need to. A junior analyst pushed through the cluster of officers. Sir, we just finished parsing archive logs. They used OpenSANDA compliance to distribute Echo 9 across 6 generations of software updates. Anytime we synced corridor pathways or negotiated channel regulation, we agreed to this. Buried in interoperability terms. Director Vaorn closed his eyes. His hands flexed involuntarily at his sides. And now, they're acknowledging nothing further is needed. A ping sounded. Every heads-up display blinked once. No message. No threat. Only the routing timestamp. Echo 9 confirmed, revocation complete. Silence followed. Not tactical, not symbolic. Just final. Earth had not launched a counterfleet. Earth had not retaliated. They'd only removed access. And with it removed function. From the diplomatic chamber on Maris Vault, Counselor Etran slammed his fist into the edge of the broadcast table. This is soft war. It must violate a core doctrine. But there's nothing to file, whispered his advisor. Nothing to trace. They haven't declared anything. They've erased leverage, Etran hissed. They've stripped action from our reach without attacking it. Across 3 star systems, orbital factories froze mid-calibration. The calibration was theirs. The instruction set, Earth's. Transit beacons began to blink red, not in alarm, but in termination. Redundant systems looped through default tasks without movement. Couriers, loaded with perishable vaccines, hovered inside bays that refused to cycle open. On the outer rim, a research satellite designed by Jazari and Terran engineers displayed a single maintenance flag and rerouted itself to drift mode. It had no permission to function. Back on Earth, inside the Blackstone core of Europa Command, a technician folded his terminal closed. The task queue next to him cleared itself. No commands remained pending. In the upper observation ring, Vor stood, unmoving. No badge, no insignia, just his breath clouding the glass as he watched the reroute logs finish compiling. A soft voice behind him. Europa's interface AI spoke one line. Echo 9 impact verified, no human intervention required. He gave no reply. Because none was owed. Release everything, Varn said, without turning from the display. Raw. No filters. The command room dimmed as authorization keys propagated through the interior node cluster. Chairs did not creak. Officers did not speak. A silent agreement passed between them, not in fear, not in awe, but in awareness that history was now manual. The first frame hit public bandwidth inside the neutral corridor over Viren Station, a thermal time-lapse stitched from Echelon's internal diagnostic logs. Viewers across half a dozen systems saw the visual taper from standard warmth to a shivering crawl. Bright hues shrank to gray. Oxygen levels dropped in overlaid graphs, red margins blinking faster with each passing cycle. The child's voice played third in the sequence. It wasn't a scream. Not begging. A call out, "Is anyone awake?" Followed by long static, then a cough that never cleared. The timestamp embedded beside it hadn't been edited. It had been waiting in the dark for 2 months. No commentator narrated, no title cards contextualized. The footage was streamed directly through heads-up civic feeds, used in most systems for transit notices, election bulletins, or station power alerts. Now, without transition, they showed death by neglect. On a trade hub orbiting Cornus Prime, a pastry vendor turned to his stall display, watched 2 officers stop mid-bite, and quietly close their hands over half-eaten loaves. They did not resume chewing. On a pleasure liner drifting above Arvik's Bay, a ballroom projection split in half. One side carried the tail end of a string quartet, the other looped crew rosters and biometric timestamps showing heart rates plummeting in environmental drop zones. A retired technician on Roshane 6 sat up in his chair. The data structure was familiar. He had installed similar fallback arrays when Earth provided the licensing templates. He recognized the subroutine call signatures. He whispered to no one. Those weren't power failures. That's refusal logic. Political organs scrambled to respond. The Accord's Media Ethics Bureau filed a concern notice, possible violation of dignity, protection clauses regarding deceased individuals. The motion gained 1 vote, then 6 retractions. In Jazari territory, a smaller but louder wave surfaced. Civil syndicates, long frustrated by their own government's centralization of external diplomatic affairs, downloaded the logs. Some groups filtered nothing. Others annotated every timestamp and structured them by region, reposting them across shared memory hubs tagged with Engineered Neglect and Echelon Event Timeline. At a mid-level district in Josser's Helron Arcology, a group of engineering students traced a relay code embedded within Earth's abandoned station specs. What they found were control layers. Not malicious, not active, just embedded. One of them spoke aloud as he pulled up the schematics. "They didn't hack our systems," he muttered, eyebrows pulled tight. "We installed their backbone ourselves." A shift took place not in command centers, but in civic forums and neutral marketplaces. Analysts had no need to explain. Earth had reframed the conflict into something no coalition was prepared to address. Neglect, structured into bureaucracy, then left running. Inside the Accord Assembly Dome, delegates gathered in anticipation of Earth's public address. It never came. Instead, a flat data block appeared on their internal systems. No logo, no sign-off, just a verified archival header with chain of custody hashes dating back 2 years. It contained logs from Europa Command's fallback diagnostics, entire chamber pressure profiles, communications from maintenance bots trapped in offline mode. Even video of the failed hatch release attempts recorded by a lower-rank tech officer. Delegate Joran Vost, representing the mining colonies of Kellen Range, stood from his seat. "Are we to understand," he asked, eyes narrowed, "that we are expected to judge this event based solely on unfiltered logs?" The room remained still. A laser plasma display on the far wall showed nothing except the words "verified chain." He turned back to the chamber. "They're not asking us to judge. They're showing us what judgment already happened." A few delegates nodded. Others remained unmoved. Some began to scan through sections of the logs that included crew family rosters, sibling messages, comm traffic redirecting to nowhere, birthday reminders still queued for recipients now classified as deceased. Meanwhile, civilian terminals buzzed across the independent belts. A former Accord translator compiled a short list, titled "What Earth Didn't Say," tallying what had been absent from the release. No revenge narrative, no justification, no identification of the aggressor, no mention of the Jasari by name. It spread faster than the actual footage. By day's end, 16 internal Jasari prefectures reported minor riots. Civilians were not protesting Earth. They were screaming at their own media networks, demanding to know how long they'd known about the deployment delay to Echelon's return pod. In the Accord's classified channel, accessible only by senior systems intelligence analysts, a vote was held. Motion: begin strategic draft of infrastructure sovereignty clause. Objective: codify limits on interoperable systems designed or licensed by singular planetary governments. The motion passed, but attached to it was a clause that disturbed several of its own backers. Effective only after systems audit, Earth to be exempt pending compliance review. Back on Earth, inside a sealed archive room 4 decks below the Europa lattice, Varn reviewed the cascade of network traffic. He did not speak. He simply lifted the archive stylus and signed off one last data release protocol. It was the final one. No new content was added. He stepped away from the console. Earth would not frame the moment. It had already passed. Status check: Jasari planetary uplinks are looping requests. The technician's fingers hovered uncertainly over her console, not from fear but confusion. 39 separate nodes across 3 systems were reporting identical faults. Nothing catastrophic, nothing visible, and yet, systems refused orders. General Theswa stood behind her, his boots planted on the control platform, with an authority that once stirred fear. Now, that authority met only the soft whine of status-denied alerts repeating on loop. His voice cut in, colder than before. Cycle through fallback networks. Force sync to Garen relay. "We did, sir. They reroute back to Earth standard templates," she answered, tone flat. Across the Jasari Coalition's central command hub, heads-up displays updated with alarming consistency. Each flashing line of unfamiliar diagnostic code that were not malware, not interference. The code complied. It obeyed all Accord protocol. It simply declined to accept Jasari origin commands. Every ship, port, logistics drone, weather stabilizer, and thermal pipe, all declined, in unison. Above, 6 Coalition dreadnoughts remained docked, but showed active core routines. The crews aboard them could walk the decks, conduct simulations, even calibrate sensors. What they couldn't do was move. Navigation subsystems ignored them. Targeting queues never initialized. Heat sinks stayed locked. Even the food dispensers refused input override. Thesval stepped back from the command tier. "Pull us off the Accord floor. This isn't a loss of force, it's the invalidation of relevance." The Galactic Accord Assembly, the Jasari delegation sat in silence. Their chair remained unfilled for the 4th cycle. Attendance was never banned, no declaration was issued against them, but each vote they submitted failed transmission, pinged against verification keys now defunct. The chamber didn't expel them. It didn't need to. They were present, they were irrelevant. Earth's delegation filed back in without ceremony. No broadcast, no announcement. One figure, Deputy Kel Varus, submitted routine motions regarding intersystem logistics. No one objected. The motions passed. There had been no demands, no retaliatory conditions, no alliance restructuring. Earth didn't rewrite the law. It let the systems interpret it, by code, by the very interoperability standards the Coalition had once demanded Earth use to prove their compatibility. Jasari regulators scrambled to craft new firmware. They wrote declarations condemning weaponized standards. Analysts drafted dossiers on Earth's manipulation, but each attempt to mobilize legal challenge hit a recursive wall. The logic layers they'd all accepted, ratified, distributed, even embedded into their own training models. A message appeared deep within the Jasari Strategic Architecture Library, not a warning, not sabotage. An index file, time-stamped decades prior, titled In Terran Low Pillar Script. Continuity Protocols, Sealed Layer Commit 45, Coordinator V. Below the title, a single line of legacy code. Coordinates confirm conclusion. If received, no action remains to take. In the Earthbound archive node that stored the core layer of those protocols, the lights dimmed. Internal counters tripped their final conditions. Vor's involvement was never fully reinstated. He issued no new directives, attended no meetings, gave no interviews. His existence had been parsed into code, silent, distributed, and waiting in strands woven through systems that were never labeled as strategic. When Coalition leadership reviewed the internal audit on his reactivation, they found no user-level session log. There was no Vor to threaten, no operator to target. Earth's revenge hadn't needed rage. It had only required time, and a failure of imagination by those who thought force alone defined superiority. Inside Earth's continuity core, a technician named Jaren tapped through final closure protocols. Each entry dissolved as it passed checksum. No copies remained, no replication possible. The continuity chain concluded at a null flag, confirming all protocols had been executed once and only once. And once was enough. As Jaren stood to leave the chamber, the station's gravimetric seals shifted behind him, locking away the archive beneath a thermal weld layer that would take years to breach without tripping system disqualifiers. And even then, what would remain was code tuned to a time that had already passed its moment. Across neutral space, border stations, previously under Jasari sway, began resettling under autonomous status. Not by invasion, not by annexation, but due to infrastructure fallback. Their core systems defaulted to Earth-aligned protocols, which required neutral registration for compliance. Some planets resisted, not politically, logistically. Without working freight queues, atmosphere recyclers, or functioning orbital calibration, they couldn't hold their systems. Not from pressure, but starvation of capability. One Accord delegate, veteran of 3 failed attempts to rally support against Earth's silence, stood on a forum broadcast and finally said aloud what everyone else had only whispered. We were playing chess. Earth built the board. A Jasari civilian protests surged outside the Coalition's resource ministry 3 days later, not in anger toward Earth, but against their own leadership. The chant was repeated across city layers, broadcast without embellishment. They knew. On Earth, the homeworld that had once sat outside the Accord's inner circle, there were no parades, no commemoration. Strategic silence held as firmly after victory as before engagement. The only update filed was a line in Earth's public ledger: conflict resolved via systemic revocation, secondary impact monitoring unnecessary. Years later, when cadets at the Accord Academy were trained in conflict prevention, one case study remained locked, under instruction-only access. The file was called Echo 9, and its opening page began with the unmodified, unstyled system Echo. Authorization rejected. Refer to Echo 9. There were no further sections. It did not require explanation. It had never needed to. What would you do if your enemy controlled everything around you and never fired a shot? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Was Earth's answer cold strategy or something more? Hit subscribe and stay locked in.